Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Forrest Gump wasn't just a heartwarming story about a simple man stumbling through history. It was a chaotic, risky, and often bizarre production that nearly collapsed under its own weight. Behind the feel-good veneer were broken cameras, outrageous studio battles, and stunts that pushed the limits of technology and safety. Today we're diving into 20 weird facts about Forrest Gump, 1994. Secrets the filmmakers never expected you to know. And wait until you hear the bonus fact. It's the one detail that could change how you see the entire film forever. Let's get started. Tom Hanks refused a salary. Tom Hanks wasn't paid upfront for Forrest Gump. Instead, he gambled on a deal tied to the film's profits. At the time, Paramount Pictures worried the movie would flop, so Hanks agreed to take a percentage of the box office gross. That decision paid off in ways no one could imagine. The film went on to earn over $678 million worldwide, making Hanks tens of millions, far more than a standard paycheck would have brought. But this wasn't just about money. Hanks reportedly believed in the story so strongly that he was willing to risk his earnings. What audiences didn't see was an actor staking his financial future on a script about a man who just kept running. It wasn't a contract, it was a bet. And Hanks won big. The Vietnam scenes weren't filmed in Vietnam. Forrest's harrowing experiences in the Vietnam War look authentic, but none of it was filmed in Southeast Asia. The entire sequence was shot in South Carolina. Clever set design, camera tricks, and CGI transformed rural landscapes into a war zone. To enhance the realism, the filmmakers planted palm trees and digitally extended the jungles. Even the mountains looming in the distance were added later with computer-generated imagery. The heat, humidity, and swampy conditions gave the cast and crew a taste of discomfort, but they weren't dodging real danger. Ironically, these sequences felt so convincing that some veterans claimed it looked exactly like their own memories of Vietnam. It wasn't Vietnam. It was Hollywood magic shot just miles away from Hilton Head. Robin Wright was gravely ill during filming. What audiences didn't know, Robin Wright, who played Jenny, was battling severe health issues during the shoot. Wright reportedly suffered from pneumonia while filming some of her most emotional scenes, including the nightclub performance sequence. Under hot stage lights in fragile health, she still delivered one of her most vulnerable performances. Wright never used her illness as an excuse, but castmates later revealed how close she came to collapsing. Watching Jenny sing "Blowin' in the Wind" while visibly frail takes on a haunting resonance once you know the truth. It wasn't just acting, it was endurance. Jenny's fragility on-screen mirrored Wright's struggle, off-screen creating a raw, authentic pain that audiences still feel decades later. The ping-pong scenes were movie magic. Forrest's lightning-fast ping-pong matches weren't real athletic feats by Tom Hanks. The actor did play, but the incredible speed of the rallies was created digitally. Hanks hit the ball on camera, but the actual ball was computer-generated in post-production to look impossibly fast. This was cutting edge for 1994, a time when CGI was still experimental. The scenes fooled millions, many of whom believed Hanks had secretly mastered the sport. The truth? Hanks trained enough to look convincing, but the real hero was industrial light and magic. Not the paddle, not the speed, pure digital trickery, and to this day, many fans still insist it was real. Gary Sinise's legs were digitally removed. Lieutenant Dan's missing legs remain one of the most jaw-dropping effects of the era. Actor Gary Sinise wore blue fabric stockings over his lower legs during filming. Later, digital artists painstakingly erased them frame by frame. The result looked shockingly real in 1994, at a time when most audiences had never seen digital limb removal before. But here's the kicker. Sinise didn't just rely on effects. He studied the body language of amputees, carefully adjusting his movements to capture the balance and weight distribution of someone missing both legs. It wasn't just CGI, it was character work. The haunting realism of Lieutenant Dan came from both technology and human dedication. 6. The running scenes. Almost bankrupted the film Forrest's endless cross-country run is one of the film's most iconic sequences, but what audiences didn't know was how expensive it became. Paramount Pictures reportedly balked at the cost of shooting multiple locations across America. At one point, the studio threatened to shut down production. Tom Hanks and director Robert Zemeckis believed so strongly in the scenes that they paid for several days of shooting out of their own pockets. Hanks later revealed, "We just said, we'll cover it." That gamble preserved one of the most powerful metaphors in cinema. A man running not for medals or glory, but to find himself. It wasn't studio funding that kept Forrest running. It was the sheer stubborn faith of its star and director, Kurt Russell's secret cameo. Here's a fact most fans still miss. Kurt Russell secretly voiced Elvis Presley in Forrest's childhood scene. When young Forrest demonstrates his unique dance to the King, it's Russell's unmistakable drawl you hear. The actor, who had famously played Elvis in a 1979 TV movie, wasn't credited on screen, keeping the cameo a Hollywood Easter egg. Some fans didn't believe it until Russell confirmed it years later. It wasn't a random impersonator. It was a movie star bringing authenticity to a musical legend. This little voiceover connects Forrest's innocent childhood to a real piece of cinematic Elvis history. Next time you watch that scene, listen closely. The King is Kurt. A hurricane destroyed the shrimp boat set. The Bubba Gump shrimping sequences required full-scale boats and docks, but during production, a hurricane ripped through the shooting location in the Carolinas. One of the shrimp boats was nearly destroyed, and production scrambled to repair the damage. For the storm sequence itself, the crew combined practical effects, giant wind machines, and miniatures to create terrifying waves. But the irony was brutal. Nature provided its own storm, wrecking sets before cameras could even roll. Not staged, not scripted, real devastation. The crew rebuilt quickly, proving that the shrimp boat was as resilient as Forrest himself. Tom Hanks's brother helped finish the movie. Running across deserts, highways, and bridges took a toll on Tom Hanks. Some of the long-distance running shots weren't Hanks at all. They were performed by his younger brother Jim Hanks. Jim, who closely resembles Tom, worked as a stand-in and double for the most exhausting running sequences. Audiences never noticed because the shots were wide, and Jim mimicked his brother's posture and stride perfectly. It wasn't just a stunt double, it was family stepping in when the lead actor's body couldn't take any more pounding on the pavement. What viewers thought was Forrest's endless endurance was partly Hollywood teamwork bound by blood. The bench was almost cut from the movie. The park bench where Forrest tells strangers his life story is now legendary, but studio executives nearly removed it. Paramount feared audiences would get bored listening to a man narrate his past from a single spot. They pressured Zemeckis to trim those sequences drastically. Thankfully, the director refused, arguing that the bench was the heart of the story. Without it, Forrest Gump would lose its framing device, the quiet simplicity that made his extraordinary life feel relatable. Ironically, that bench has become one of cinema's most iconic images, immortalized in tourist photos in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't just a prop, it was the film's anchor. Ice cream was melting faster than cameras could roll. The hospital scenes where Forrest shares ice cream with Lieutenant Dan look simple, but the crew faced a sticky nightmare. The hot lights on set caused the ice cream to melt almost instantly. Buckets of fake ice cream were made using mashed potatoes dyed to look like vanilla, allowing the actors to shoot multiple takes without dripping messes. Gary Sinise later joked that he ate so much ice cream, he never wanted to see mashed potatoes again. What audiences didn't know was that one of Forrest's sweetest moments, his innocent offering of ice cream, was built on movie trickery. It wasn't dairy, it was starch. And yet, the illusion fooled millions, cementing the moment as a touching highlight in cinema history. Sally Field played Hank's mother despite their age. Gap. Here's a weird Hollywood fact. Sally Field, who played Forrest's mother, was only 10 years older than Tom Hanks. Just 10. The makeup department worked overtime to age her convincingly for the role. This oddity wasn't lost on Field, who had played Hank's love interest just 6 years earlier in Punchline, 1988. To go from romantic partner to mother raised eyebrows, but Field tackled the role with warmth and gravitas. She sold audiences on the maternal bond, proving how much makeup and performance can reframe perception. It wasn't a mother-son age gap. It was pure cinematic transformation and one of the most convincing in film history. The famous catchphrase was almost cut. "Stupid is as stupid does" is Forrest Gump's defining line, but studio executives almost removed it. Early test screenings suggested audiences didn't understand the phrase, fearing it might confuse or alienate viewers. Zemeckis pushed back, insisting the line was Forrest's core philosophy that actions define a person more than labels. Against the odds, it stayed in, and it became an immortal catchphrase now part of everyday language, not cut, not softened, kept exactly as written. The line that executives dismissed as too weird became one of cinema's most beloved quotes. Sometimes the strangest risks are the ones that stick forever. The movie nearly starred John Travolta. Believe it or not, Tom Hanks wasn't the studio's first choice for Forrest. The role was offered to John Travolta, who turned it down. At the time, Travolta's career was in decline, and he didn't see potential in the quirky script. He later admitted this was a huge mistake. Other names reportedly considered included Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, but both passed as well. It wasn't destiny. It was rejection after rejection until Hanks stepped in. And yet, can you imagine Forrest Gump without Hank's quiet sincerity? Not Travolta, not Murray, not Chase. Only Hanks could carry the role with that delicate balance of innocence and wisdom. The feather was a CGI marvel. The floating feather that opens and closes the film looks simple, but it was one of the movie's most complex shots. Filmmakers used a real feather guided by invisible wires during filming, then enhanced it digitally with computer animation. The sequence required intricate choreography between camera operators, puppeteers, and digital artists. It wasn't just a prop drifting in the wind. It was a carefully constructed metaphor about destiny and chance. For 1994, the blending of practical and digital effects was groundbreaking. What seemed effortless was a triumph of precision. That feather didn't just fall, it was guided by art. Tom Hanks' accent came from a child actor. One of the strangest details about Forrest Gump is where Tom Hanks's southern drawl originated. It wasn't his own invention. The accent came directly from Michael Humphreys, the young actor who played Forrest as a boy. Humphreys had a naturally thick Mississippi accent, and Hanks realized that for continuity, he'd have to mimic it rather than invent his own. He studied the child's speech patterns closely, even adopting his unusual rhythm and pauses. It wasn't an adult creating a childlike voice. It was a star adapting himself to a child's natural cadence. This reversal of influence gave Forrest's speech its unforgettable authenticity. Not invented, not rehearsed in dialect class. Pure mimicry of a real boy. The White House scenes used old footage. When Forrest meets presidents like Kennedy and Johnson, he's seamlessly inserted into real archival footage, but the process was grueling. Visual effects artists used motion tracking and digital compositing, cutting edge in 1994, to place Hanks into historic moments. For Kennedy's scene, Hanks' dialogue was synced with an actor impersonating JFK's voice. For Lyndon B. Johnson, the team manipulated old clips to make it look like he turned toward Forrest. What audiences didn't realize was that these interviews were Frankenstein creations of old film reels, sound design, and computer wizardry. It wasn't real history. It was cinematic time travel decades before deepfakes. Forrest's line about Apple computers was prophetic. When Forrest casually mentions that he invested in some kind of fruit company, it got a laugh in 1994, but what audiences didn't know, that fruit company was Apple Inc., which at the time was struggling to survive. The filmmakers included the detail as a cheeky joke. Decades later, Apple became one of the most powerful corporations in history, making Forrest's offhand comment seem eerily prophetic. What was once a throwaway line about stocks became a cultural wink at one of the greatest financial turnarounds of all time. It wasn't just comedy, it was accidental foresight. The script was almost a science fiction story. The original novel by Winston Groom had a very different tone than the film. Early drafts of the script followed Groom's wilder ideas, including Forrest going into space with an ape and becoming a professional wrestler. Screenwriter Eric Roth stripped away the outlandish science fiction elements, focusing instead on the grounded, emotional journey we now know. Imagine Forrest in orbit, or fighting in a wrestling ring. It wasn't far from reality during development. Not heartfelt, not tender, almost absurdist science fiction. The film we got was a radical departure, one that reshaped Forrest into a character audiences could embrace for decades. The movie was a box office gamble. Forrest Gump wasn't expected to succeed. Paramount executives feared it was too weird, too sentimental, and too long. Even after Tom Hanks signed on, the studio slashed the marketing budget, but word of mouth exploded after release, and the film became a cultural juggernaut. It went on to win 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, and cemented itself as a generational touchstone. What was once dismissed as a potential flop became a phenomenon, not a risk, not a gamble, but a legend that continues to ripple through pop culture. There was almost a sequel. Few fans know that a Forrest Gump 2 script was written, titled Gump and Coworkers, after Winston Groom's novel sequel. It would have followed Forrest through events like the O.J. Simpson trial and the Oklahoma City bombing. But after September 11th, Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis agreed it felt wrong to satirize such recent tragedies. The project was shelved permanently. What audiences didn't realize, Forrest nearly walked back into American history a second time. Not just a feather in the wind, nearly a franchise, and its absence may be the strangest twist of all. Forrest Gump wasn't just a sentimental film, it was a battlefield of studio doubts, technological breakthroughs, and human endurance. The result was a story that transcended time, one that audiences still revisit for its blend of innocence and heartbreak. Like that drifting feather, it continues to float in the currents of culture. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your favorite Forrest Gump moment below. After all, as Forrest himself reminded us, you never know what you're going to get.